All right, let's. All right, here we go. Uh, I want to hit one more thing, be a little more obvious about something that I've kind of knocked around, but I want to make sure that I say it so that you don't miss it. So, as we talked about all these different positions, offices, descriptions of jobs that was going on in the first century. Um, when in Paul's epistles, this is kind of the organization that the churches that Paul established, that he wrote to, had. Um, and for lack of a better term, these were very much democracies where the assembly, the whole group, was more or less the government. And they chose elders and deacons for the services that needed to be done. Um, and again, like we talked about, kind of followed the same kind of model that they had been used to in the Jewish uh, organization, the way the Jews organized their leadership. So uh, everything kind of flowed both ways. So the elders were not really as much on a pedestal as they really were with the Jewish structure. And the deacons, everybody worked together, and this is the way, now this, I'm not saying this is the way it was, this is the way it was expected. This is what Paul was wanting them to do, was this. Um, there was always um, decisions to be made and that sort of thing, but it was kind of a collective organization that worked like a family, and everybody worked together to accomplish the same ends. And that's why he was constantly writing in his letters, y'all need to do better. Because when you put people together, they don't do better. And so you have to constantly encourage them to work together and work all for the same goal and move all in the same direction. But this was the idea. This is what he had in mind. And this is, I'm, we can only make assumptions from what we have within Paul's epistles and in Acts and that sort of thing. But this more than likely was the general structure in all the churches. And I didn't really plan to say this, but um, this may become a theme, so I will also mention that one reason it was like this, and one reason that that nobody sat down and wrote a church constitution and organized a chart saying this is how you structure all these people and these are all the things you have to do to make it work, was because nobody expected to be here next week. Why go to all that trouble when it's just going to disappear? Jesus is coming back, and it's all going to be over with in 2 weeks, so who cares? And that was kind of the way, that's kind of the reason it got like this. And then all the apostles died. And everybody started thinking, it ain't going to be next week. So it started to change a little bit. Um, and so when it started to change a little bit, uh, by the end of the first century, it started looking more like what we're used to. There was one person in a church who was in charge. Uh, and that's not to say he was made dictator and he got his way and did everything he wanted to do, but it was more of the kind of structure that we're used to, where things kind of flowed down to the congregation instead of the congregation making all the decisions and driving the church in a particular direction. And so there was obviously still some of that kind of thing going on, but you end up more with what you're kind of used to. In churches now, and of course, for every church you can find a different organization. But this is kind of the way things evolved because as time went on, the everybody working together and nobody having any particular charge uh, wasn't working that well, and so it solidified. And this is what you generally see with government and organization. So uh, the time that we're talking about with the Didache is somewhere in between the two, I would say. Um, and you can see from chapter to chapter, remember that the Didache is looks like it's something that somebody took and put together various sources of. And in these 3 or 4 chapters here at the end that talk about um, how to handle prophets and apostles and what that kind of organizational type of discussion is going, you can see that in every chapter it's a little different. And that's because this person has grabbed 3 or 4 different versions of the same thing, and it's a little bit the same, but it's a little bit different, and you'll see that as we kind of walk through this. I was going to mention this in a few minutes anyway, but I'll go ahead and mention it now. Um, when it talks about prophets and apostles and these people, even here in the Didache, even though the Didache has mentioned women once or twice, and we have those places in the New Testament where it talks about prophetesses and deacons and female presbyters. Um, you always see when it's talking about leadership roles, you never see a female pronoun, which that ought to tell you something. So yes, we're all working together. We're a family, and so the women get to participate too. But they have to do what the men tell them to do. So I don't want to imply that it wasn't a completely male-dominated society, because it was. That didn't change. But more women did receive more attention in the churches than they did in general organization at the time. But that wasn't much. It was tiny, but it still was a little different. And I think that was because Jesus did that when he was in their midst. He gave women more respect than they were normally given. Let's put it that way. But I don't want to overemphasize the fact that women did participate. They participated many times. It's like today too. I'm sure it was like today in that many of the times that women participated, it was out of necessity because the men weren't doing it. So I'll leave it there, and we can draw what little bit of conclusions we can from that. But I was going to point that out when I got to a few of the hymns as we go through this. So anyway, we've gone through half of this Didache 11 here, and we got through this point. But let me just pick it up here and kind of get back to where we were. The apostle who goes should receive nothing but bread until he lodges. But if he asks for silver, he's a false prophet. And every prophet speaking in the Spirit, do not test or judge, for every sin will be forgiven, but this sin will not be forgiven. And that's the blasphemy of the Holy Spirit thing. But the one speaking in the Spirit is not a prophet unless he has the conduct of the Lord. Thus, from their conduct, the false prophet and the prophet will be known. And the prophet who orders a table in the Spirit does not eat of it unless he's a false prophet. So we go to here. Every prophet teaching the truth, if he does not do what he teaches, he is a false prophet. That's a pretty easy formula to follow. Now, verse 11 here is one of the most difficult verses in the entire Didache. To try to figure out what he meant. Every approved prophet, so every prophet who is approved, meaning it's a prophet who has been proven. Okay, that's what that really is saying. Every prophet who has been proved to be a true prophet, not a false prophet, doing truth in the mystery worldly of the church, does not teach, but does that which he does. Do not be judges over yourselves, for with God he has the judgment, for the ancient prophets did likewise. Ugh. Okay, so that's the reason it's like that is because that's a pretty close to literal translation of this verse. So you kind of have to know, you kind of have to be in ancient Greek to understand what all these words strung together this way mean. So here's a little bit different translation, which makes more sense than that one did, okay? Do not judge a proven prophet who does the truth when he performs a worldly mystery of the church, but does not teach others to do it. God will be his judge, for ancient prophets did likewise. Now, even that way, it's not clear what he's talking about, because if this is a proven prophet who's doing truth, but performs what is a worldly mystery of the church? So he performs a worldly mystery, but he won't teach anybody else to do it. So this could mean several things. One of the more obvious things that kind of pops out is having the knowledge that they were working and living in a time when it was a spirit-driven church, and so there were the gifts. This could imply a prophet who has a gift and does miraculous things, but won't teach anybody else how to do them. Because there was the notion back then that if somebody could perform certain miracles, they could teach other people to perform those miracles. If you'll remember from the book of Acts, there was Simon who went around selling his miracles, and then here come the apostles doing better miracles than he was doing, and he wanted them to teach him how to do those miracles because he knew they'd be worth more. And they wouldn't do it, but that's the idea. So it's maybe the notion that this prophet knows how to do things and he doesn't teach other people how to do them, which technically you shouldn't be able to teach somebody to do miracles. They wouldn't be miracles if you could teach somebody to do them, right? So that's one possibility. Another possibility is has to do with the Eucharist way of thinking, because this prophet may perform the Eucharist in a different way than other people and doesn't teach other people to do it that way, but tells them to do it the standard way, that only he can do it that way. That's possible, and that's a principal notion, because eventually this word mysterion that we've encountered over and over again, mystery, both in the New Testament and here, eventually comes to represent the Eucharist. That was another word they used for the Eucharist. So whether or not it was pointed in that direction, that's a possibility. Another thing, and this comes from that last comment, for the ancient prophets did likewise. So this is talking about the Old Testament prophets. So if whatever this is that he's talking about is something that we have represented in the Old Testament prophets too, apparently. And one of the things that comes to mind there is Hosea. This is possibly the kind of thing that it's also talking about, because this is what Hosea did. When the Lord first spoke through Hosea, the Lord said to Hosea, "Go, take to yourself a wife of whoredom, and have children of whoredom, for the land commits great whoredom by forsaking the Lord." So he went and took Gomer, the daughter of Diblaim, and she conceived and bore him a son and several other children too. So Hosea goes at the command of the Lord and marries a prostitute, and probably a temple prostitute, and ends up, and actually the way this reads, and if you go specifically on the way it reads in Hebrew, what it may also say is that the children that she had, being children of whoredom, meant they weren't his children. So he married her, but he didn't have any children by her, but she had children. All at the instruction of God. And this was God showing the children of Israel how he felt, because this is how they treated him. They were his wife, and they were out committing whoredom with all these other gods. And so that was the reason God did it, was to make Hosea the example. But you wouldn't expect Hosea to go around teaching everybody to marry a prostitute. So perhaps this is the kind of thing that the Didache, whoever wrote this, had in mind. Was this kind of behavior, that a prophet was doing something that he didn't want everybody else to do, but he had a good reason for doing it, and he was a proven prophet, so he was truthful, but he didn't teach everybody else to do it. Nobody knows for sure what he was really trying to say here. Okay, so moving to 12. Whoever should say, in the Spirit, give me money or something else, do not hear him. But if he should say to give to others in need, do not judge him. What's the idea here? In the Spirit, what does that mean? That either in speaking in tongues or in some prophetic capacity, he says, never seen this before, but he says something crazy like, God said for you to send all your money to me. So even if he's in the Spirit when he says it.
And before him it was Oral Roberts. Yeah.
Do not hear him. Okay? We've seen this more. I mean, this is not the first time we've seen this already. So apparently this was very quickly a problem in the church. And I'm thankful that it was seen as important to tell people that they didn't have to believe everything that everybody told them. Because apparently back then, as it is now, everybody believed everything that a preacher told them. So we keep seeing this over and over again is, yes, you're supposed to do this, but. So there was always the testing. But if he says to give it to others in need, okay, that makes sense. All right? Okay. But you should receive all who come in the name of the Lord. Then putting him to the test, you will know, for you have discernment of the worthy and false. So again, following the same idea here in chapter 12, first of all, receive all. If somebody comes to you and says they're coming in the name of the Lord, you don't question them initially. You receive all in the name of the Lord. So you trust initially. Then putting them to the test. So you don't just accept them outright. You test them and make sure. Now, how are you supposed to know? Because it says, putting them to the test, you will know. How are you supposed to know? For you have discernment of the worthy and false. So he says, you will know because you have the ability to know. How do you know? All right, so I want to go back to this. So this is again the structure that we're talking about, probably more than otherwise in the Didache, is the same as what Paul was talking about. But there's a piece of this puzzle, a very important piece of this puzzle that's missing. This works great. This is how it's supposed to be. But it won't work without one element. Yeah. Because while this is the structure that Paul had in mind, he was expecting this. Everybody involved has one common element. So they should all be thinking the same way. And that's the idea that we're getting from this verse in the Didache. That this works, and all these prophets traveling around saying they're prophets works, but it only works when you put them to the test because you have discernment of the worthy and false. And that comes from the Holy Spirit. And again, I point out repeatedly, there was no New Testament to read and apply tests with. You had to get this out of the air, literally, out of the Spirit. And so that's what he's talking about. When these guys show up, that's what you do. And again, these guys. It's him.
Had the presbytery up above the deacons. Is that how they had it set up, or?
Well, the deacons was not. We know this, but we sometimes don't think of it in these terms. But deacons, right? They didn't have any authority to tell anybody to do anything. People had the authority to tell them to do things because that was their job. So, but that again, once things started to harden and we started getting these structures, that changed. They became authoritarians. They not in the sense that we take that word, but they were people with authority. So
more of a position that people aspired to,
right,
instead of working.
So that was the case with all of these things, and everybody. And I went and looked for a chart maybe that I would show of a common of a common structure today in churches, and I found dozens and dozens and dozens of them, and they all look different because everybody had a different job than the other people. So there were, we've invented all sorts of positions that if you're in Paul's church, you don't need because Jesus is coming back tomorrow. So, you have the ability to test these guys, and you can do so, but it's a him. If the one coming is passing through, help him as you are able. He shall not remain with you more than 2 or 3 days. Now, he's repeating himself here, but I think he's repeating himself here because this is one of those other things he picked. He picked one thing and he picked another thing. They say the same thing, so he's just repeating what we've already come across before. You get 2 or 3 days, but that's it. So he shall not remain with you more than 2 or 3 days if necessary. But if he wishes to dwell with you, and this is where we'll pick it up next week because I don't want to get into this too far because I've got a little bit more to throw into this. If he wishes to dwell with you, having a skill, he should work and eat if he works. But if he does not have a skill, that's when you have a problem. If he does not have a skill, take thought according to your understanding so that he should not live lazy with you as a Christian. So there's not a really polite way to say this. This is not a new problem. Obviously, the problem existed at this time too. They show up and they don't have any skills and they want to stay because if they stay, they get fed, taken care of, and their only skill is being a deadbeat preacher. Literally, if he does not wish to do this, he is a Christ dealer. And beware of such persons. This is a word that is not a real word. It was a word invented for this particular use here in the Didache. Christ dealer, literally it's Christ seller. It's the word seller and Christ put together. If he does not wish to work, he is a Christ seller. Right. So this problem existed very early in the Christian movement and still exists today. And these are the persons who fail the other test and say, God told me to tell you to send you all my money. So it's amazing to me how, being as early as the Didache is, this is obviously already a problem. So we're going to look a little more into this, where Paul talks about this, etc., as we go through here. But if you ever want to see that word in Greek, that's what it looks like. Christ dealer, Christ seller. So, okay, we'll leave it there.